Randy, some people talk about product management like it's a one-size-fits-all thing. I always find that weird.
Yeah, like when people assume that someone who worked at one of the big Silicon Valley firms is automatically going to be the best fit for their startup. And, just spread that magic pixie dust, even if that person has never been in that kind of an environment.
I've worked in companies of different sizes over the past few years, and there are some things that definitely translate between them, but some things I had to learn whole new approaches for. So we're going to get deeper on that this week with Liz Clow, CPO at Memo.
Liz has also worked at startups, scale-ups, and enterprises, and she's got a great way of talking about what the differences are and how to prepare to thrive at any of them.
And it's even got an acronym. I need to create something with an acronym.
Okay, let's work on that after the chat. The Product Experience is brought to you by Mind the Product. Every week on the podcast, we talk to the best product people from around the globe.
Visit mindtheproduct.com to catch up on past episodes and discover loads of free resources to help you with your product practice. You can also find more information about Mind the Product's conferences and their great training opportunities happening around the world and online.
Create a free account on the website for a fully personalized experience and to get access to the full library of awesome content and the weekly curated newsletter. Mind the Product also offers free Product Tank meetups in more than 200 cities. There's probably one near you.
Hi Liz, welcome to the podcast. It's so lovely to be talking to you today.
Hi Lily. Hi Randy. Nice to be with you tonight.
So before we get stuck into our topic, it'd be great if you could give us a real quick intro to who you are and what you're doing in product these days.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Liz. I'm the CPO at a Swedish startup called Memo. But I got into product quite a long time ago. Like several people working in product, I like to talk about the days before we even called it product. So, the early 2000s, after being a journalist for a few years, I kind of stumbled by luck, by fluke, who knows what, into product when I was working at the BBC. Had a number of years working across the likes of BBC News, BBC Sport. As a product manager, I was part of the BBC's first product team, where we were very fortunate, had Marty Kagan kind of flown over to come and kind of coach us. And that's how I got into product, really. I think there's quite a few synergies with journalism through, kind of digging into things, research, being curious. And as I say, a bit of luck, as much as anything. And, fast forward through the years, after there, I went and worked in a couple of other news companies, including at News UK, where I headed up product at The Sun. And then after the kind of stint in the media, I moved into kind of marketplace companies. So I was at Groupon, which obviously is an e-commerce company. I then worked in the iGaming sector at iTech Media, and then now at Memo.
Awesome. So you've had quite a wide and varied career working in lots of different types of product businesses. And so today we're going to be talking to you about some of that really varied experience that you've had in different sized product organizations, and what it's like doing product in those different types of businesses. But when you think about your experiences in those different organizations, was size the main factor of the differences between them, or were there other things at play that really distinguished the roles that you were doing and how it impacted what you needed to do?
So I definitely don't think size is the only factor. I think but it is significant. I think, working in a startup, scale up, or a more established kind of enterprise company is different. And what I've come across is, lots of people are quite intrigued by that and often ask me, what's the difference? I see myself as a startup PM, or I see myself only working in big companies. And actually, I think there's not so much difference in the fundamentals in those places. Obviously, how that kind of manifests itself and how you actually do product management or be a product leader of product managers in those environments can vary, but it varies whatever organization you work in, whatever sector you work in. But the size can have a massive impact in how you do product. And, I think it's definitely, as people, I know a lot of product managers are looking for new roles at the moment. The market's been really tough. And I just think, I'd really encourage people to look outside where they've worked previously and kind of open their eyes to other opportunities, because I think there's perhaps a misconception that startups can always be really, really fast and enterprise companies really slow. And I don't think that's always strictly true for many reasons.
So, Liz, if it's not size or stage of the company, what are the distinguishing factors that we should look for in deciding, is this one right for us? Is this the type of opportunity we should go for or maybe branch out into?
So I think it depends on what you're looking for in your career, but moving into a different size company can, really stretch you and create a load of growth opportunities that you perhaps wouldn't get by staying in the same environment. And there are so many similarities as well as differences. And, I've kind of broken this down into, a bit of a kind of looking at the different kind of pillars that you could compare and contrast those organizations. And, a nice little acronym, SCALE, just to make it really easy to remember, really looks at some of those pillars ultimately. So SCALE stands for strategy, customer centricity, agility, leadership, and execution. And those are things that we all talk about as product managers. And, if we were to dive into some of those, I think there's, as I say, kind of some just different ways that you would approach them. So perhaps I'll start with strategy. And, what I've seen in startups is that you can go into a startup and you might be, one of the first things I've experienced is, people on the ground, your team, your colleagues saying, I really feel like what's missing is a strategy. What does that look like? We're trying to do lots of things, but we don't really know where we're going. And I think that's where, as a product manager or as a leader of product managers, it's our job to come in and help bring that plan, bring the company together, centered around those, where we want to get to. Obviously, as a strategy, we're ultimately looking at where are we now and where do we want to get to. And in startups, often it does exist. It exists in, the wonderful brains of some of the entrepreneurs I've worked with, but it doesn't exist as something that the teams can really rally around and get excited about. And so that's one of the things that you really want to be able to do when you come into a startup environment, to bring some of that product thinking, to really kind of think about the goals, think about the customers you want to focus on, the market landscape, and do it in a really quite timely way, quite a lean way. Doesn't have to take weeks or months to start to pull that together and bring some shape around strategy. As I say, in startups, scale ups, sometimes that's what they're crying out for. And that's often why entrepreneurs bring in experienced product people to bring some of that into the organization and focus everybody around that.
And my experience is mainly in startups, and I've always imagined like the kind of the strategy process in startups tends to be quite fluid and, a little bit chaotic, maybe. I always imagined that doing strategy, like product strategy and putting your product strategy together in a much bigger organization or kind of older organization would be like a much more mature process and a much more defined process. Is that the case, or is there still that kind of scrabble around for information and data and buy-in from different people and trying to have those conversations and get alignment and all of that kind of thing?
It can be all of those things, and I guess it really depends on who the most senior product person is that's in place, and whether they've managed to have some of those conversations and bring some of that alignment before you've joined. But not always. I think, although we live and breathe product, it still can be, the thought of a product strategy as opposed to a business strategy or a marketing strategy can be, a new lens on which to look through. And so it always depends. But I think what I've seen in the larger organizations is increasingly colleagues and senior leadership looking to product teams to bring a fresh pair of eyes. Because what we can often do in those organizations is help break down silos. And I think that's one of the really important things we can do as product managers in larger organizations is bring together, conflicting strategies, conflicting plans, and help to be, to bring that product-led approach to bring data and insight into the conversation, and not just have a strategy focused purely on revenue and goals of that nature. So it can take time, but a lot of that time can be around the communication aspects of working as a product manager, having those conversations, as I say, bringing that insight to the table and getting everybody on the same page. I think that's the biggest risk to the larger organizations, is where they are working in separate ways. And as I say, increasingly, I think in those larger organizations, they're looking for fresh ways to do this to align everybody.
So when you're working on the strategy in the larger organization, this is like me theorizing like what it's like to be in that position. But again, I sort of imagined that in order to get all of the inputs into your strategy, it's very much a case of managing lots of other people and resources to help you formulate that plan. Whereas in a startup, you might not have someone who's heading up research or a data analytics team. So you're very much kind of doing the work yourself as well as putting the strategy together. Do you think that's a fair sort of summary of the potential differences there?
Yeah, I think it absolutely, can be, the time it takes to pull those people together, because you want that input, of course, from, various parts of an organization. Sometimes it depends on how empowered you are as a product leader, for example, in those environments. One of the larger companies I worked in, I had a great deal of autonomy to create and lead and, pull that strategy together. Great freedom around kind of a budget, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes it a lot easier if you've got that understanding of what budget you've got to play with, what team you've got, you're fairly aligned with where the business is trying to go, then actually you can get started fairly quickly. But it's still super important. Your strategy is never going to be successful unless you take everybody on that journey. And, I really kind of stress upon that. That's such an important part of that role in the larger organization, is having those difficult conversations, because what you also want to be clear about, and again, I'd probably bias this towards the larger organizations, is making sure you're very clear about what you're not going to focus on as well, and not, for the next, X period of time, this is our focus. But just as importantly, this is what we're not going to do. We're not going to do this right now. We might come back to it in the future, but to create focus, which is what you really want in a strategy, it's as much about being transparent and saying no to things and being really kind of clear about that to your colleagues, so that you can get that buy-in. And that's a never-ending conversation, of course, as well.
Liz, one of the ways of creating that alignment and creating that focus on strategy is by using OKRs. And I know you've got thoughts on the different ways that they're used at different size and stage companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of OKRs. Ultimately, they're there to help our strategy, to see whether we're going in the right direction and to help us execute on that strategy. So, but it doesn't mean OKRs are always easy. And, one of the larger organizations I worked in, there was a little bit of resistance to introducing OKRs on a grand scale. So it felt much more natural and was more successful just to start that small, taking one squad or one product team and playing around with using OKRs and seeing whether that worked and whether that was successful before steadily rolling it out further. But I've also seen, in other organizations, in particular in kind of the startup, scale up type world, where, teams have already played around with OKRs, but perhaps they're not quite working for them. And I think going into those organizations and having a fresh pair of eyes is always so helpful. But I've seen, perhaps the OKRs being taken over by process or by the software that's being used to track them, etc. That can be so painful and so draining to teams. And so I'd rather not use OKRs at all if they're just being used for the sake of it, rather than helping to guide the teams and to guide the strategy. So, again, keeping it really simple, having, making sure that whether that's the teams themselves are centered around just a single objective, underpinned by, 3, 4, 5 at the most KRs is all it needs, rather than having, teams having multiple OKRs or individual and OKRs that kind of, span all sorts of different kind of sets of teams. So getting in there and really, going back to basics, OKRs at the absolute fundamental are there to guide us. They're to create alignment between teams. They're to, set really stretchy, ambitious goals, but they're also there to create focus and not be taken over by the process that it takes to get there. So I always encourage teams, start small, and build from there. Make sure that they're working for you. In where I am at the moment at Memo, we use OKRs. We stopped using them for a while when we found that the process wasn't right for us. But now we center all teams in the company around 3 simple sets of OKRs, and that really works. And so it doesn't matter whether somebody is a product manager, whether someone's an engineer, a salesperson, we're all centered around 3 OKRs, which we know are super important to us, and we're able to measure and track using kind of leading metrics to make sure we're on the right path. And then pivoting when we're not. One of the things that we've done at Memo is pause a KR midway through a quarter. I wouldn't always encourage that, but actually when we are moving and we've been kind of evolving our strategy over the last 6 months or so, as we've moved from a kind of more B2C world into B2B, and it just made sense to pause a specific thing that we're working on and reset that KR. Don't carry on with them throughout a quarter just because you've set them at the start. That's not helping your strategy either. Things do change. That's not to say I would encourage changing them all of the time. You need some kind of stability, obviously, but don't carry on with them if they're not working for you, if they're not working for the team, and make sure your teams really buy into them. Otherwise, what's the point?
Hey, Randy, are the rumors true?
Billy, I can't believe it. MTP are giving away all 9 of the San Francisco keynote talks for free, both the recording and a written summary of each one.
And handy discussion points and thought starters to think about solo or with your team.
And an email notification each time a new talk is published on mindtheproduct.com.
So you'll never miss a talk and be the first to hear when the next one is hot off the press.
Of course, nothing can beat attending MTPCon in person, but this is the next best thing.
So sign up at mindtheproduct.com/SF Keynote Kit. That's mindtheproduct.com/SF Keynote Kit. Yeah, absolutely. So we've really deep dived into strategy, which is the first part of the SCALE acronym, which I like, by the way. Sometimes I'm not keen on an acronym when it feels like it's been shoved into make up a word, but I feel like this one makes a lot of sense. So I'm
Great.
a fan. So the next one was customer centricity. So how does that differ between, or how is it the same between larger orgs and the smaller startups?
Well, certainly in the larger organizations, I think the opportunity there is for us to make sure that customer insight isn't siloed and is there for, for all to share. I think traditionally and historically, customer insight might have sat in a marketing team or something like that. But, as companies become much more product led, there are snippets of insight and data that just should be shared around as much as possible, whether that's, getting people from customer service involved, as well as obviously kind of UX researchers, marketing teams, etc. And so part of the role in a larger organization is to be that catalyst for change and to encourage that sharing and democratizing of any insight that's coming in, and perhaps helping surface that through processes, through showcasing, through kind of teamwork to bring all of that together. So I think that's where in a larger organization that I've seen the biggest opportunity, as I say, bring that to the fore. So it's not hidden away, and so everybody is thinking and talking with the customer at the heart of everything. And then at the other end of the spectrum, it can be about, showing the value of getting that customer insight in startups, where people have been so busy and trying to get that product market fit really early, perhaps haven't had enough team or enough specialists to be able to really focus on that. And I think, again, in that startup environment, it's making sure that the value of that insight, the value of data at the heart of the business is really your focus. And that's so it is different between the smaller companies and the more established companies. But it doesn't mean that nobody's thinking about customers. It doesn't mean that nobody's digging into data, but actually it's both surfacing it in the larger organizations and then actually using it and finding value and taking action off it that I've seen in startups.
That leads really nicely into the next bit about agility. And I think a lot of what you're talking there is using the customer centricity and the strategy that we've already talked about in a way to create empowered teams. But how does this vary? What are the different levels of challenge that you see?
So I think in terms of agility, it's absolutely about creating an environment where teams can work quickly. So what does that mean? It means enabling product managers to be able to be the decision makers. Ultimately, they're closest to the customers, they're closest to the data. They should be in an environment where they can make decisions, because product managers have to make, I'm going to say, hundreds of decisions a day, whether that's prioritization calls or whatever it might be. And we need them to be able to do that. So I think, empowering people and setting up empowered teams with product managers and designers and engineers, etc., all working really together and collectively, that can happen whatever size of organization. It just comes from will. It comes from leadership to set that environment up and make sure that it can happen, and those teams can really move very, very quickly. So that's what we want to encourage. And I think in a startup environment, sometimes that agility can be seen as being very busy. Teams, there's always so much to do in a startup. As you say, Lily, that's the environment you're so familiar with, and it's so busy. There's always so much to do. But actually, by creating that team environment, and again, that's where OKRs comes in as well. To enable people to move quickly, you need clarity on the direction you're going on. Setup of the teams so that they're trusted, they understand what being empowered means, they understand what it means to take decisions, and then as a product leader to be able to really encourage that, and sometimes that takes coaching, because not everybody's used to that empowerment, especially if they've come from an environment where that doesn't exist before. And so I've worked in places before when, with my engineering counterpart, for example, we've spent time really articulating what is meant by being empowered, what trust does look like. And I think just having that freedom, it kind of, you just see the best work, don't you, when you give people the environment to thrive and to make decisions. They'll go on and do exactly that. And it's not the Wild West. People aren't just going off and doing their own thing. That's still within the overarching kind of strategy, the OKRs that sit there, and sometimes in the scale up environments and startup environments of being in, making sure that we've got that layer of communication where kind of product managers can come back for feedback, can come back for advice, can be unblocked. And so you need the right forum set up for that. I've called them previously things like strategy sync. So you have a check-in with those empowered teams on a regular basis. So you're there kind of unblocking them, helping them, encouraging them to go and kind of, crack their OKRs and move their piece of the jigsaw forwards.
So moving on to the leadership element of the SCALE acronym, what's the difference there then? Because I imagine that is definitely, surely that has to be one area where it is quite different between a startup environment and a much bigger organization.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, it looks different in different environments. And, in that larger organization, often leadership is about, setting up the teams to be empowered. It's about the communication and the dialogue that you're having to have with other colleagues in other parts of the business to make sure that you've got that alignment. In a startup environment, leadership can look very different. Sometimes you're rolling up your sleeves much, much more and leading by example. So it can look very different. What's similar, though, is as a leader, whatever size of organization you're in, you're there to bring that product mindset, whether that's in a startup, bring that into the entire company often, to bring that data-driven mindset, to make sure that that collaboration and communication is happening. But, you see that as you go through the size of organizations, scale-up environment, your leadership role is often hiring and recruiting a team, where you need to trust and take on other people in your team to manage the day-to-day, because so much of your time is spent on recruitment in a scale-up environment. But absolutely, once you get to the larger organization, you have to have the right setup. You have to have the teams in place. You have to have the processes, because so much of your time is spent with other parts of the organization, in getting buy-in, in understanding where the business is going, and some of those other areas that you need to put your focus on. So it varies, but it's ultimately, whatever size of organization, it's about bringing that product mindset, about bringing data and insight, about setting up teams for success. But you're doing it in a slightly different world. But it's really exciting and challenging, whether that's the larger organization or the small one. It's just different ways of approaching it.
And how do you kind of manage upwards in both of those scenarios? Because if you're like a product leader in a smaller startup or scale up, you're probably very close to the CEO or founder and the C-suite if you're not in the C-suite. And then in a kind of much bigger organization, you can be a product leader, a head of product, but not have that closeness to the C-suite. So how do you kind of juggle the sort of differences in how you approach managing up in those two situations?
So I think I've been really fortunate, because in the larger organizations I've worked in, I have worked really closely with the C-suite, either reporting directly into a CPO or a CTO on occasion. So though, that managing up has not been too challenging. I can imagine that in some circumstances where you're a bit far removed from that, then it would make it really difficult. But that's not my experience. I think actually, in those larger organizations, I mean, it's super important. You can't really be hugely effective, I don't think, as a product manager, as a product leader, unless you have that interaction with the C-suite, either directly or indirectly, because what we're doing has to be aligned with the direction the company is going in, and to kind of encourage that product-led, that product mindset within the organization. You want to be able to have those opportunities. So maybe I've been quite lucky there, and I don't have any kind of times where that's been really difficult. you're absolutely right. In a kind of startup scale environment, work really, really closely with CEO, founders. And that's great because that really helps bring in that product mindset into not just into their environment, but the wider leadership team as well. And I think, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders, are really kind of really switched on to, the way product managers think, the way we work, and the benefits we bring to an organization, and having that really regular dialogue just helps. It doesn't just help product management and a product department, but it actually helps a business as a whole to bring in some of those great practices that we have. So yeah, it's definitely different, but I've not had the experience in the larger organization, which hasn't enabled me to speak pretty much directly to C-suite all the time. Thank goodness, because I think it would be really, really challenging if you didn't have those avenues and those routes to celebrate and to work with those people.
Liz, how much does coaching and relationship management come into it at these different size and stage organizations?
Yeah, I mean, coaching is absolutely fundamental, whatever organization size we're working in. That one-to-one coaching is just a non-negotiable from my point of view. It's so important. And, just having that in place to be able to encourage, to provide feedback, and to help the people in your team be the best possible product manager that they can be. It's super important. And also in a larger organization, what you can do through that coaching is give insight that perhaps your team members won't have, a little bit like we were just talking about being, whether, you have access to, the conversations from the C-suite and things like that. Your role as a product coach in that environment is to also feed information and insight into the wider business into your team members. So coaching, absolutely crucial, non-negotiable, and is just one of the best parts of being a product leader, to help and encourage your product managers or designers to be the best that they can be.
And speaking of excellence, that's a nice segue into the last point on the acronym, which was execution, and doing that excellently. So tell me more about this. Like, what are your experiences when it comes to execution in both different sizes of org?
Well, ultimately, regardless of size of org, I think execution is where we're all judged, isn't it? This is where we are successful or not so successful, because regardless of, we can have the best product environment and the best people, but if we're not hitting our goals and if we're not delivering at a speed that meets expectations, then, you're going to struggle to kind of really prove success. So I think where execution excellence really comes in is bringing that alignment and, making sure that what we're being judged for and how we're being measured is really crystal clear. So there's no surprises. And again, kind of that's where I really like things like OKRs, because they can be front and center of how we're judged and how teams themselves can judge whether they're being successful and whether they're moving in the right direction. So I think, it is really, it's ultimately, we've got to be able to move at pace. We've got to be able to deliver against our outcomes. But of course, we know in the product world, we don't always know what that looks like. And, making sure that those conversations around being very outcome focused rather than just, feature led or output focused is important. So you don't wait until you're suddenly delivering lots of things. You want to align your colleagues, your leadership team around those outcomes very, very early on, because otherwise I think you can get into situations where product teams can be judged for, whether they are delivering certain features or whether they are delivering by a certain date. Of course, that's just not an environment you want to be in. So my message there is, let's, you want to be able to move at pace, but you want to be able to move at pace to deliver those outcomes, because that's what will make a successful business. That will make really happy teams and happy bosses as well if we're hitting those goals. So that doesn't vary so much regardless of environment. I don't think, you're judged on that in the larger organizations, of course, and in the smaller organizations, there's a lot of focus on pace and, hitting product market fit very early on. And so, we have to set up that environment where people can do all of those things. And, product managers and engineers and designers and researchers working very, very closely together, having those empowered teams is crucial to that as well.
When I was reading about scale and came to the execution element of it, it reminded me very early on in my career of a boss that I had who would always talk about like what good looked like. And, do you know what good looks like? And I was always just a bit like, what? But now I find myself saying it, a lot to other people of like, as a team, what does a good, even just like, what does a good user story look like? Or what does a good Jira ticket look like? And what does a good presentation to the business look like? What does it achieve? And for me, like that execution element, and even in the micro tasks or like work that you do as a product manager, it really kind of speaks to that side of things as well for me, and how important that is in all of those different areas to know what good looks like, and to be able to strive for that and make sure that you're always improving and you're really being the best that you can be. So yeah, I just love that. Execution excellence is like perfect.
Thanks, Lily. And I think that's really, that just reminded me of something as well, which is, you really want to, the old cliche, progress over perfection. That's one of the things I say all of the time. Yeah. But, one of the great things in a scale up and a larger organization is having a larger group of product managers that you're working alongside and creating that kind of community of product management. So you're all learning from each other. So, as you say, kind of, some of those things, what does good look like? I don't have all the answers. Every individual product manager doesn't have all the answers, but together, hopefully we can crack it and encourage each other continuously to be better and better and strive for, that good, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Liz, it's been so great talking to you about all of this stuff. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to chat. Thank you very much.
The Product Experience is the first
and the best
podcast from Mind the Product. Our hosts are me, Lily Smith,
and me, Randy Silver.
Lou Ron Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
Our theme music is from Hamburg-based band POW, that's P-A-U. Thanks to Arnie Kittler, who curates both Product Tank and MTP Engage in Hamburg, and who also plays bass in the band, for letting us use their music. You can connect with your local product community via Product Tank, regular free meetups in over 200 cities worldwide.
If there's not one near you, maybe you should think about starting one. To find out more, go to mindtheproduct.com/product tank.